Hi, I'm Ted. I'm a knitting teacher here in St. Paul, Minnesota. I wanted to talk today about 3-needle bind off in 1x1 ribbing. I'm making Manhattan Hat by Tori Yu, and one of the options for finishing the top is a 3-needle bind off. So this is the standard one right here, actually. It's perfectly nice. It's a little bit bulky on this side, which will be the inside, and when we flip it over and we look at the outside, things line up nicely, but there's this kind of ditch that runs through there, which is fine. Like I said, this is a perfectly acceptable and nice solution to many types of joining fabric together. So that was a good option, but I wanted to sort of see if I could get a little bit smoother across there. So here's a way that I tried next, where I knit from the front needle and purled the back needle. And that was less bulky of a bind off, but when I turn it over, I get a little purl row through there. And I didn't like that. This one I hadn't set up either, so these would line up, but that's just because of how the stitches were set up. It has nothing to do with the way that I did the bind off. So this one was okay. This one didn't really work. I'm gonna show you guys the way that I found that I liked a little bit better than both of those. So what I wanted to do was be able to purl, to basically work the stitches in pattern as I'm joining them together and binding them off. In Manhattan Hat, we do a double decrease in our last row of, just changing that back to a normal stitch mount, our last row of decreases, and it sets it up so there's purls next to each other here, and each needle will then start and end with a purl with the knit purls in between. So I have 7 stitches on each needle, 14 total. And each needle, if I look, has a purl as the first and last ones. And that will just make it so the columns of the ribbing will all line up together once we have them joined. So if I'm going to try to work this in pattern, we can see right away with our first stitch there's a problem. We have to have our yarn in front to purl that stitch and behind to knit that stitch. So it has to be on the outsides of the needles, and it can't really be there. What we're going to do instead is actually form our knit stitches by passing something over. So we could normally, like if we knit this stitch like that, that makes a knit stitch. But we can also make the exact same stitch by laying the loop of yarn that we want to be through here across there, and then pulling that stitch over. It makes the exact same stitch. We're just accomplishing it in a different way. And that's how we're going to do the knit stitches from the back needle, basically. So here we go. Let's see if we can get this all right. So I'm going to purl this front stitch, and I'm going to keep the yarn in my right hand. It's actually a little bit more cumbersome in your right hand, but I think you can see the path the yarn is taking a little bit more. If you're a continental knitter, I think if you just look at how the yarn, where the yarn's going, you should be able to work this out just fine. So I'm going to purl that stitch, and now I need to have this loop go over that loop. That's what just came through that purl stitch. Now I need to go through this knit stitch. The first thing I actually need to do is change its stitch mount. So it's mounted eastern. Otherwise I'll twist it as I flip it over. So that's going to sit there, and then I'm going to just flip that over like that. And now I've accomplished my first joining stitch, if you will. Now I have to do the next one. This one's a little bit easier because this time I have a knit stitch here and a purl stitch there, which means the yarn has to be behind this needle and in front of this needle. Well, that's just between the needles, so that's not such a big deal. So I'm going to bring the yarn back, because I'm going to first insert as if to knit, and then I'm going to bring the yarn forward, because now I'm going to insert as if to purl, like that. I'm going to purl that stitch, and that can come off, and now the yarn has to go back to the back, and I can pull that through the knit stitch on the front needle. So it's a little bit of a gymnastics thing. If your yarn's in your left hand, it's easier to have it be moving back and forth between those two, so there's not quite as many it doesn't feel like as much, but the yarn's doing the exact same thing. So, and now I've bound off one stitch. So now I'm back to my first scenario with the purl in the front and the knit in the back. So I have to bring my yarn forward. I have to purl that stitch. I have to change the stitch mount of that knit stitch, put that onto that, put the loop that's on my right needle onto my left, pass the one I'm trying to join over. Now this comes back. See, there's a lot of passing. We'll look at the difference at the end to see whether all of this extra work is worth the result. So now we're back to sort of the easier scenario. Yarn has to go back, quote unquote easier, and then wrap the yarn around. Oh, yarn goes back, and then yarn comes forward. I'm not really wrapping. Just bring the yarn forward. Now I'm wrapping, and this came off my needle tip, but that's not a big deal, except for that my yarn likes to split. That comes back, and then I pull through. And now I bind off stitch 2, like that. Now we're back to the purl is the first one, so yarn forward, insert purlwise. Let's see if I can get that just out of the way so visually it's not bugging anybody. Purl, that comes off, flip the stitch mount of the back stitch, put that on, over it goes, that goes there, bind off a stitch. Bind off a stitch. And now we've got knit on our front needle, so we're going to have it kind of between, so I can wrap to bring the yarn to the front, and then insert there, wrap around there, off the back, and then it slipped off my needle tip again, but not a big deal. This just has to go to the back, so it's not in the way, and that goes over. And then bind off the next stitch. Okay, last stitch. I find this also gets a little bit loose on me sometimes, so I have to remember to be a little bit more snug. Part of that is just the size of my needles and the size of the yarn. So off, and then flip, that goes there, this goes there, over, snug up a little bit, it's down there, and then this is my last stitch bound off. I'm just going to pull that long. Normally you would cut it and pull it long. And let's get a little untangled here. I am prone to tangling. Okay, so we've got our chain that's lying on the top as well, so less bulk. And let's look at the other side. So here's the front. So I don't really have that distinct valley anymore. It kind of just flows a little bit more evenly to my eye as it goes around. You're never going to keep these columns perfectly looking like they have no interruption, because they're going in opposite directions. We've got V's this way and V's that way. So opposite directions of columns there is why there's a little bit of discontinuity still. But I think it's a smoother finish. Let's compare it to this. Obviously it's different yarns, but I think you can see that that doesn't really have that same valley as we were getting there. So again, is this a solution that has a problem that doesn't even really exist? Is it worth doing? I don't know. I think I'll probably try it on a couple more projects and see what I think as I get better and better at it. Thanks for watching, and I hope you guys have a great day. Take care.